What is up, friend? I want to thank you for joining me for another episode on the Journey Beyond Divorce. And I came across a quote today from Humble the Poet, and he had stated, "Don't be afraid of losing people, be afraid of losing yourself, trying not to lose someone else." And that's a powerful thing when you really think about it because how often do we get into a relationship? How often are you in a relationship that you're so focused on the other person that you forget to focus on yourself, that you forget about who you are as an individual and making sure that you stay connected with yourself in the process? I know one thing that I experienced was the piece of disconnecting from myself and not truly knowing who I was getting out of the marriage and then going through my journey through the divorce piece. And so it is one of those things that a lot of people have the trouble of going and losing their identity, losing who they are because they're fearful to repel or fearful to lose the other individual. And so it is interesting because this weekend, my oldest, actually both my daughters, had a hoop recital, which is a very unique piece of art when you go see it. They're on the hoop. Some of them have the silk ropes and whatnot, but it was just very powerful to watch as they performed today and just to see them in their element and just to see how strong and powerful they are. It was like Circus Soleil in a miniature style. The thing though that took place was Friday night. I was driving back with my oldest and we were talking and she had a very low energy. She was very upset and so I was asking her what was going on and she brought up the fact that she was fearful that she was going to make a mistake during this routine. And so it got me thinking. I was like, man, she's 12 years old. She's fearful of making a mistake. So if a 12-year-old has that piece, how often as us as adults do we have that trouble piece of failure, of making a mistake, of what's going to happen if it doesn't work right? And so talking to my daughter, finding out more information on what took place, she during some practices with hoop, she ended up having a pretty big accident, slipping off and falling into something. And she was scared she was going to do that again in a bigger limelight and the stage light in regards to being in front of more people. And so it is interesting because by hearing that fear that she had because she had the experience of falling down and not wanting to have that occur and take place again, it was interesting because I look as us as adults when we go through that situation, when we have that situation that we've have faltered and felt in, how often are we scared to open up and be our true self? How often are we scared to come up and be vulnerable and show up as we should, as ourselves, but instead we hold back because of the experiences that we've had in the past? And so, talking to my daughter, asked, I was like, how many times have you practiced this routine? How many times while practicing the routine have you fallen off and gotten hurt? And she brought up the fact, she's like, not many. I was like, okay. So we need to flip this and think about the times that you have succeeded. Think about the times that you have overcome it, completed your routine to the level that you need to complete it. And it's interesting because it's also one of those things that as adults going through those relationships and going through the piece of falling down and having the experience of faltering and having failure, not wanting to show up and play big because we have that experience of what took place in the past. And so I would ask, as you, as my friend, as you're thinking about it, how much of your past experiences are you allowing to dictate what takes place? And then when it comes to new relationships, are you going through the same vicious cycle that you went through in your previous relationships? And it goes back to that quote that I shared earlier, which was by Humble the Poet, talking about don't be afraid of losing people, be afraid of losing yourself, trying not to lose someone else. And so, how many of you that are listening are fearful to repel the few? How many of you are fearful to show up and be your true authentic self, but instead you're resorting back to what led you to where you're at now, in a situation that, because you aren't showing up big, you weren't showing up as your true self, you're missing out on being your authentic self, being fully present, and just living in the moment, living the experience. And so you have the opportunity now to look back at your previous relationships, see what went well, and then what can you potentially work on going forward. But it goes back to that piece of how many of you are fearful to go and move forward because of the mistake that you had made in the past. And I think that's one of the things when we look at it, us as individuals, when you're going through the journey beyond divorce, dealing with previous relationships, we allow those situations, we allow the experiences of not the greatest experiences sometimes of you could potentially look at it as a failure piece, even though failure really is part of that growth piece. It's part of the progression piece to get to the next level that you want to get to. But sometimes that can be a difficult thing to grasp onto because we're so hard and we judge ourselves so much harder than what we should. And instead of looking at the situation saying, what can I learn from this? What can I grow from? And what can I bring into the next relationship? We're looking and we're focused on the failure piece. We're focused on the hardship, and we don't overcome and get to that next level because we're focused on the pieces that aren't going to get you further along. And then it's also interesting because when you are in a relationship, are you showing up 100%? Are you showing up as your true authentic self and giving 100% in the relationship? Because the unique thing is, a lot of times we will hear individuals speak of this 50-50 relationship. And if you look at that as, oh, it's 50-50, that's not good because you get into a situation and you start looking at each other. A lot of times we have the idea of not accepting responsibility for our action, but we're looking at other people and blaming other people for what's taking place. And instead, we need to look at that as 100-100. So you get in that situation and you're giving 100, the other person's giving 100. And then when you walk away, both of you are walking away with 100% instead of this 50-50. And then you have some weird math going on where one person's 56% responsible, the other one's 44%, and everybody's mad at each other. Because I was talking to my daughter, and this was after having her express the fear and the piece of not wanting to fail. She was also talking about in practice, she gets yelled at. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And she's like, well, they don't, my coaches just don't think I'm giving 100%. And so the interesting thing, I was like, okay, so you say you are doing your best, but when you look at the percentage that you're providing during practice, are you giving 100% or are you giving 50 to 60%? She's like, I'm giving 50 to 60%. So I was like, right there, you've kind of sold yourself out, and you have already stated that you're not giving 100%. Instead, you're doing this 50, 60%. And then you get upset because people are yelling at you. Your coaches are yelling at you because they see more in you than you see in yourself, but you're not showing up and giving 100%. And so that's the same situation that we have here in regards to the relationship piece. when we're going through life, are you giving 100%? Or are you assuming that let me give 50% or 60% in the situation, but I can receive 100% of what I should receive? It's interesting because there was an individual that I was speaking to that he was speaking on the idea of three different pillars in life that we have to be mindful about knocking down. But the last one he had spoken was when an individual comes to a vending machine, they don't come up to the vending machine and tell the vending machine, hey, instead of $1 for that bag of chips, let me give you 50%, or 50%, let me give you 50 cents. But in exchange for giving you half of what I have to give you, I expect you to give me 100% of that bag of chips. And it doesn't work that way. You have to give 100% if you want to see results happen, if you want to see the growth and the progression take place. But it goes back to the situation that sometimes we have this fear factor that if we go 100% because our past experiences, the past failures that we may have faced, that there's that chance that things aren't going to work out. And so that's where we have to look at the situations that arise, the situations that take place, as each of them as their own separate experiences. Because this experience, you may not have had the greatest experience with it, but then you come across a person, an experience, and it's kind of in the same bowl, the same situation that you were in before with that previous experience. And so you start judging, you start looking at that new opportunity as that new individual and potentially start jading that whole situation because you're reflecting back on the previous relationship. And so, because of the previous relationship not being the best, you start bringing forth and start saying, okay, because this situation didn't work out, it's going to be the same way here with this situation. But the thing is, you've got to look and say, okay, every experience is its own unique experience. So instead of judging this new experience with the past experience, keep that past experience in the past, look at the new experience, and just let it take place. Just let it grow. Just let it do what it needs to and see what comes out of that situation. Because you just never know, because that new experience, that new person that you come across may be very similar, but completely different results because you allow it to grow, you allow it to progress, you allow it to get to where it needs to go. You allow it to grow as it needs to grow instead of burying it with past experiences. And so it's a very unique aspect. It's a very unique idea and piece in regards to just listening and just seeing if things are happening or if you're saying things because of what your kids may be saying, or they may not be your kids, but it could be children. And so it's one of those things that kids speak truth. Kids will speak openly and not hold back because they're kids. And so by listening and hearing them, you can potentially see if what they're speaking on is something that you need to look at for yourself and see if there's something that you're missing, and then go and see what you can do with that information. But it's one of those things that as an adult, are you having an open mind? Do you have an open ear to receive what is being spoken by a child, by what is being spoken by your child, and you're not discounting them? And so it's just one of those things that I reflect on, just part of the journey. And I have to laugh because it's coming from my kids. And so it's one of those things that with the coaching piece and working with individuals, I try to talk to my kids and they're my kids. And by being an adult, being a parent, they don't want to listen a lot of times. And so it is one of those things that allows me to work on my skills, to allow me to work on my mindset, and just see what I can do to adjust because of that interaction piece, because of that expectation piece of it being my kids. So this is a quicker episode, a very quick episode. And it was just one of those things, just really bringing the value, bringing that information to be a quick hitter, to not go as long because sometimes that gets lost in the length that we go. But as I always state and as I always share, that if you have any questions, if you feel as if you're stuck and you don't know what to do, or you feel as if I'm here, but how do I go from my baseline to thriving in whatever part of life that is for you, reach out, send me a message, send me an email. There's multiple different ways. In the show notes for the podcast, I have several different ways that you can reach out to through Facebook, through Instagram, TikTok. Emails are there. But then for anybody that's watching this through the live or watching it on the replay and you just don't know, and you're like, who do I need to talk to? What do I need to do? Send me a message and we'll sit down and talk and see what that is for you, for that step that you need to take to go in the direction that you want to go. And like I tell people, what is the smallest, simplest step you can take to get to that next level of progression that you want to go to? And sometimes it's difficult for you as an individual to really figure that out because you're 100% in everything. And so by having somebody on the outside that can look and ask questions, it opens up and it starts allowing you to extract things that you didn't see before. But other than that, friend, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for showing up and you being you and just being the great individual that you are, for what you bring to the world and what you're doing to impact the lives of others. So other than that, love you guys. I'll catch you guys later.